In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the transfer case gasket on this Chevy Silverado. Let's get into it. We're going to disconnect the battery. You can disconnect the negative terminal using a 10mm wrench. If you need to, you can take this plate out of here, but it's not necessary. You can work around it. Loosen that up. And slide that off and out of the way. Pull the dipstick for the transmission off. You want to unlock it. Then just grab it and pull it up. I'm going to disconnect the connector for the O2 sensor. Just slide this lock up. That will pull out, and then pull up on the tab. Slide it out. This is the one on the driver's side. It's the inboard side of the frame. And disconnect the one that's attached to the transmission, or the bracket near the transmission. Just pull the lock out. Disconnect the connector, and then we need to take the connector off. There, we can use a trim tool or a screwdriver. And just slide it off. There we go. On the passenger side, you're going to have the connectors on the outside of the frame. Just disconnect that lock. And slide the connector off. And this last one. And I'll slide this connector off. Use a trim tool. You can pop the connector off or just slide it just like that. You might have a little wire retainer right here. Just take those off. On the passenger side, the front O2 sensor, we need to remove that so that we can access the nuts. So use a 7/8 wrench or an O2 sensor socket. There we go. And pull that out. Now I'm going to use a 15mm socket. We'll take the nuts off. They go on the flange right there. There's 3 of them on each side. Those out. Take those out. And the last one. Right here, you're going to need to disconnect in front of the flex pipe, this connection right here. This one's extremely rusty, so you normally would use a 13mm socket and take the bolt out and it should go up. This one, I'm just going to have to cut it off. Now it's separated right there. Slide this off. Separated. We're going to take these nuts out. That's out of the cross member that holds the transmission support. Use a 15mm socket. Take those out. Now Now underneath the transmission, we're going to use a transmission jack and just support the transmission. You can see that the transmission is going up a little bit where the mount is, so that the weight is off of that mount. Now we're going to take that bracket down. We have to take these 2 bolts out on each side, the nuts and bolts, using a 21mm wrench on the back side and a 21mm socket. Take the nuts off first. Slide the bolts out. Just going to leave this one bolt in until I get the other ones out on the other side. Just temporarily, I'm going to use a pull jack under the exhaust just to move it out of the way so I can access that bolt. Nuts out and the bolts, and then just grab the cross member. We'll slide this bolt out and slide this one out, and it slides right down. Now I'm just going to lower that pull jack and grab the exhaust. Slide it back, slide it down, and it comes right out. Before we take the drive shaft out, we just want to mark it, because when we go back together, you want it to go back the same as possible. Just using a crayon, just mark the drive shaft, the U-joint, and then just on the flange or the yoke, so that when you go back together, you're not going to cause any vibrations that weren't there before. I'm going to loosen these bolts with an 11mm wrench. And take those out. You're going to take the cap out as well. And if the bolts won't come out, that's okay. We'll take that out once the drive shaft comes out. Do the same on this one. That's out just a little bit. I can't get those, well, I can get that bolt out, but the other one's still stuck in there. We just have to move the drive shaft forward. Just to keep the caps in the same spot, I'm going to mark the caps as well. Now just get a pry bar, go in between where the U-joints are, and just pry out. Pop out. You can take these out. And you want to try to prevent popping the U-joint caps out. This one's stuck in there a little bit. We just don't want to lose any of the needle bearings, so just see if you can pry that out a little more. And just be careful, you don't want it to fall on top of you. Just support the drive shaft while you're doing this. And slide the drive shaft out. And drop it down. Now we're going to do the same with the front drive shaft. You want to mark where it is before we take it apart. Just mark this one. And the cap. Now using an 11mm socket, take those out. And this one you can spin. Take these out. We need to remove one of these clamps right here. You can just use a pick. Just pop this off. Just want to spread it. Sometimes you can reuse these clamps afterwards if it's not messed up too much. Or you can just use a wire tie. It will work as well. There we go. Pop that off. We can pry this boot back. You can just use a prying tool, just a screwdriver or a trim tool. Just pop that off just like that. That's good. Now using a pry bar, just pop this out. We're gonna go up with this, and then we can take the drive shaft and slide it forward, and then we can slide it down again and pull it out. Now we're going to take this transmission mount out, use a 15mm socket, take these bolts out. Disconnect all these connectors. There's one right here. Disconnect the motor. There's a speed sensor connector up here. Disconnect that. Slide those out of the way. Now where all these wires are attached, there is a bracket with a retainer. You want to just use a trim tool, get under that. Just take that off of the bracket, slide those wires out of the way. And then this hose, if you want, you can slide that hose out as well. Just pop the bracket off, or the retainer holding the hose on. Or you can open up that bracket as well. Just use a pick, slide that hose out of the way. There's a breather hose in the front. You want to take that off. Just pop that off, out of the way. We want to take out the transfer case nuts. Use a 15mm wrench and loosen these all up. Before I take them all off, I will leave one just finger tight. There should be 6 of these nuts. You'll have one on the bottom, one on the top. On each side, you will have 2 nuts. Take those off. And take these nuts out on the side. This one took the stud out, and that's okay. For the top, I'm just going to use a smaller wrench. This one is actually custom made. I just put a bend in it. It makes it easier to grab. But if you just have a stubby wrench, you can get on there and loosen that top nut off. And pull that nut down. And take those nuts off. And this one pulled the stud out as well. A little bracket right here, you can slide that back. All right, so there's a couple threads on here. First, I'm going to put a drain bucket under here just in case we lose any fluid. Just pry this out. There we go. So some fluid came out. Let it drain. Now, make sure you have an assistant when you're pulling this down. I'll pull that nut out. Whoops, more fluid. Okay, we'll just come back. Now you just want to clean up this area. Use a razor blade or a gasket scraper. Just clean up any excess gasket material. Make it smooth. On the transfer case, you want to take the gasket off here. Again, use a scraper or a razor blade. Just peel it off. Gotta get this all off. Now we want to take the gasket and just line it up. And that looks good. It's only going to go one way. See, this doesn't line up, so we need to move this. That lines up right there. So this tab, for this vehicle anyway, goes right here. I'm going to raise this up. Slide that in place. And get one of the nuts on. And get that nut started. All right, that stud and nut started. And put the other nut on over here. And put the other studs and nuts on. Don't forget about the one on the top. Then we can tighten them down. Snug those up. Now if you can fit a torque wrench in here, you want to torque these nuts to 37 foot-pounds. Do the best you can. Now hook this hose up right there, lock that in place. Now the wiring, we're going to connect all the wiring. And this hose is going to go over here. It's just a breather hose. Lock that in. And that connector there. And right there. And if there's anything retaining those connectors, you want to push that back in those brackets. This one right here. Right there. That's good. Now take the front drive shaft, go straight over here and get the back yoke into the transfer case. Slide that in, lock it down. And make sure you line the marks up. Push it in place and put the caps on. Get the bolts started. And snug those down. Now I'm going to torque these bolts to 18 foot-pounds. Just using a pry bar to prevent it from spinning. When you're reinstalling the front drive shaft boot, you don't have to reuse the clamp. You can if it's still intact, but you can use just a wire tie and that'll be fine. Now slide the drive shaft back in place. Get the yoke lined up. In the back, make sure this is lined up with the marks that you made. It's lined up. Put the correct caps on. And you want to tighten those down. If you can get a torque wrench in there, you want to torque those to 18 foot-pounds. And you want to take the catalytic converters, line those up, slide that in place. We have a new converter, so it looks a little different. But the procedure is the same. Line the bracket up top. That bracket lined up. And get the nuts started. On this side, you want to put a new seal right here. And slide this up. Let's hook these together. And put the nuts on. Slide this in place. And then we'll tighten this down using a 13mm socket. Just get that snug first. Once everything's in place, we'll tighten it down more. Then we're going to tighten up the nuts. Start on the driver's side, tighten this flange down first because this is the solid flange. And those are all tight. Now we're going to tighten this in order. Just go around, snug them all up evenly. And those are all tight. Now we'll tighten up the clamp. Use a 14mm socket. Make sure that's tight. I'll just adjust this so that it fits on there right. And tighten it down. good. Now take the transmission mount, line this up, get those started. Tighten these down. Tight. Now take the cross member, line this up. And I'll take 2 of the bolts. Get that one started there, and the other one over here. And I can at least let go of it, and take the other bolts. And get all the nuts started. And tighten these down. Now I'm going to lower the transmission onto the support. Now I take the 2 transmission mount nuts, put these back, get those started, and tighten them down. Those are snug. Now I take the connector for the O2 sensor, line that up, connect that, and lock it down. Then you want to slide that connector onto the retainer. It's a little bit higher. Lock that in place, and that should look like that. Then you would do the same with the other ones. And put the dipstick back in for the transmission. Lock it down. And connect the cable for the negative battery terminal. Get that on, and we'll tighten that down. Snug that down. Just give it a wiggle. Make sure it's tight. After you're done, you want to check the transmission fluid, have the vehicle running, get it up to operating temperature, pull the dipstick out, then wipe it off, and reinsert it. Pull it out again, and you want it in between the hash marks, in between those 2 dots. So that's where you want the fluid level. If you need to add fluid, you're going to use a funnel and add the fluid, the correct transmission fluid right there. And lock it down.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.